Hello there, if you're watching this later. If someone has shared a link with you or you're watching this later on Facebook, why don't you just wait to the end? And after you've watched the whole thing, if you feel like you want to share it, awesome. My name is Corey. I should have told you at the beginning. My name is Corey. This is Existential Sundays. This is a live weekly broadcast that is just for folks who are feeling a sense of questioning inside themselves about God, about society. Maybe you've been a part of church or some other religion before, and you're now like, I don't know about it. This whole space is for all of us. It's a safe space for all of us to wrestle with the ideas of the divine, as well as ideas about each other, in a space that's safe for us to bring all of our questions and everything that there is about us, right? So this is also named after a podcast, Existential, where we do the exact same thing. We have conversations about justice, faith, and culture. So thank you for being here. Those of you that are live on Facebook right now, why don't you go ahead and share this, hit the share button, make sure you're in the comments that you're commenting, and maybe even tag people in the comments who you think could be here. I'm going to say good morning to a couple folks over here. I see Jennifer is here saying hello. Jen Hollingsworth. I don't know why I called you Jennifer. Happy anniversary, by the way. Our good friends, the Hollingsworths, are here this morning. And I'm going to just, like, before I start sharing, I'm going to allow some folks to show up that are here in the live space, because there's something I'm going to do for this particular broadcast that is going to be important to people that are here live, that I don't have to repeat myself. If you're watching later, no big deal. But if you're live, I just need to, so bear with me if you're watching later. I need to let some folks get in here for a moment. Tom, good to see you. I can't see everybody who's showing up, just those of you who are saying hello. So again, make sure that you click the share button if you're live on Facebook, and also comment so that I know that you're here, and maybe tag some folks in it. I'm going to take a sip of this water, and then I'm going to start with this really cool thing at the beginning. If you know how it works, don't ruin it. But if you don't, I think this is going to be pretty cool. All right. Let me set this up for you. Okay. What's up, Nikki? How are you? Good morning. When I was in middle school, there were these, there was a handful of like little magic tricks, if you will, that like I learned, and I was doing them all the time. And I actually carried them into adulthood, to be honest with you. They became like dad tricks that I would do, like with my kids when they were smaller, when they actually cared about the stuff that I did. So I'm going to do one with all of us here today, but this requires that you be decent at math, not Tom Epperly at math, just decent at math. Okay. For this to work. So this is what I want every one of you who is watching right now to do. Whether you're watching later or you're watching live, I need everyone to get a number in your head. Don't tell me. You can tell if you're in the room with people, you can tell them, but don't put it in the comments. Just get a number in your head. Okay. I want you to get a number in your head. It can be from 1 to 8 bajillion, if that's even a number. 1 to infinity. Whatever number you get in your head, get it there. Okay. Does everybody have a number? I'm gonna look in the comments for just like thumbs up that you have the number, and I'm gonna try to move slowly through this so that everyone can follow along. So thumbs up, first thumbs up I see will let me know that you guys have a number, and I'm gonna move on. Got it. Everybody's got a number. Okay, here we go. Now here's what I want you to do with this number is I want you to add 100 to that number. We'll just start easy. Add 100 to that number. Tom is so good at math. I don't even know what that is. I don't even know what that means. Okay, you've added 100. Cool. Now add 35 to the number. That may take a little bit of time. We'll give you some time to do that. Add 35. Add 25 to the number. So you've added 100, you've added 35, you've now added 25 to the number. Now add 40. Only three more things, guys. Okay, we're going to do three more things, and then we're going to be, there will be the reveal. I know it's super early for math, right? So you've added 35, you've added 25, you've added 40. Now add 300. Give you a little time. 300 is a big number. Give you a little bit of time on that one. Hope you're doing this too if you're watching the replay, because this is the foundation for what we're about to talk about. Subtract 100. And then here's the most important part. After you subtract 100, now subtract the number that you started with. I'm going to give you a little bit of time here. I'm going to give you 10 more seconds. 8, 7. I'm no longer looking at your comments, but if you were doing the math correctly, all of us should have arrived at this number. This is where we're at? Is everyone here? Thumbs up if you're at 400. Let me see. I just want to see this really quickly. Sorry for those of you watching this later. I know that watching it later to see if everybody got to 400 is, annoying. I imagine Tom may know how we got to 400. Everybody's at 400? Okay. So I remember when I used to do this, as a kid, and even now as an adult, the coolest thing would be people being like, "What? How'd you do it? Like, how did you get to the number? How did you know what number was in my head?" Right? And it made me look really, really cool. I hope nobody's like, Meg knows also. I forgot Meg was watching with you. But like, it's really not like that hard to get us all to the same number. And the reason I chose 400 is because 400 is a significant number for America. It's also a significant number for the Hebrew people in the Bible. And so earlier this week, I was doing some reading, and I came across this sentence in the Bible that was fascinating to me. And it was this: it's, remember that you were slaves in Egypt. Egyptian slavery was 400 years long. And I started to think about like the parallels between Egyptian slavery for the Jews and chattel slavery for Black folks in America. And I started to think about how often it is that I have either been explicitly told to, or it was suggested that I forget about how we got here or what we started with here in America. And that's when I thought about this silly game, if you will, that we played a few minutes ago. Because for anyone who knows how that whole thing works, is it doesn't matter what number you had in your head when we started our whole math routine and going down this path. When I asked you to forget what you started with, or to eliminate what you started with, to eliminate that as a factor, we were all going to be at the same place, in this blissful place of the same number. But we got there because in some way I cheated. Like it's just some way to make myself look good and to make it seem like I can totally guess what number's in your head. I asked you to do a bunch of math with me and then to subtract what you started with. I started from a completely different place than where you started, but I ensured that we all were at the same place by making sure that you forgot what you started with. And I feel like in America, especially when we're talking about the Western evangelical faith community, there's a lot of this that's asked of people of color to forget what we started with, to forget how we got here, to forget that 400 number that 400 years of chattel slavery that led us to where we are. And so when I saw this, like in Deuteronomy, I was like, oh, that's really, really interesting to think about how for the Hebrew people, for the Jewish people wandering the desert, to remember what it felt like to be on the blunt end of oppression was something that they felt was important. And as they understood God, something they felt like God would think was important for them to maintain as they move forward in their society. Like it was something that they thought, we don't need to forget. We don't need to like do away with what we started with in order to move forward. In fact, we need to embrace what we started with so that we can move forward. We can't move forward without remembering what we started with. So there's 3 ways that I think, really quickly, I want to share with you that I think are important for that I take away from this one sentence in the Hebrew scriptures that are important for us as we think about living our lives here, modern day in America. And let me say this also while I'm talking about this, that like whenever we are approaching like ancient texts like this, like texts that's thousands and thousands of years old, there are certain things that like we would say are a step forward for them that certainly wouldn't be a step forward for us. So I'm not, when I talk about these things, I just want to be mindful of it, because I know sometimes we can look at ancient texts and deem it oppressive. And to be honest with you, in a lot of ways it is oppressive if we're trying to take it and go, let's apply this word for word, line by line to our modern day society. Of course it's oppressive. Of course it's barbaric. But what I am talking about is how we take the spirit of the thing and talk about it in our modern day society and see if it allows for us to be more just in how we behave with one another. So the first thing is that remembering what we started with, remembering slavery. The first thing that does for us is it allows us to honor those who came before us. Now, I realize that as I'm delivering this talk to you right now, it's Memorial Day weekend. Tomorrow is Memorial Day. Tomorrow's the day that we remember those who sacrificed for American freedom. There is no group of people who had a greater sacrifice. Is it Memorial Day or Veterans Day? It's a day we remember. I just realized as I was talking, like, which day is it? It's a day that we remember those who came before us, those who sacrificed. And there's no group of people who sacrificed more for America than Black folks, than the slaves who built this country. And so as we're talking about like remembering slavery, we honor those who came before us by remembering. If I forget, in the way that at times I felt pressure to be like, Corey, don't, that's in the past. Don't think about it. It's like, it's over. Why are you bringing up old stuff? If I allow myself to like have that happen, I will also then have to forget about those like Dr. King and Malcolm X and Rosa Parks and Fannie Lou Hamer and Stokely Carmichael and Harriet Tubman, the men and women who were brave enough to endure the hardship that they endured to allow us to get or to move us to where we are today. For me to forget about slavery and forget about Jim Crow is to forget that inside my veins runs the blood of people who had grit, who had a sense of power and love that moved them in a way that is uncommon. Like, I'll forget what stock I'm from if I forget about where I came from, if I forget about what we started with. And when we as Americans forget about slavery, then we also forget about Harriet Tubman. We also then, if we forget about Jim Crow, we also forget about Dr. King and Malcolm X and people who brought us to the place where our society is not all the way there, but it's more just than it was in some ways. The second thing is that we, by remembering what we started with, we understand why things are the way that they are. So for any of you who were going through this, like, again, this really silly exercise with me in the beginning, where I'm taking you to add this and subtract this and yada yada yada. Like, if you don't understand what you started with, and how me asking you to take that away from your calculations, if you don't understand that, then you will certainly be like, oh my gosh, how in the world did we all get here? It's magic. Oh my God, how did it happen? Like, you would actually probably walk away thinking I'm some genius magician, like I'm David Blaine. But the reality is, I asked you to take away what you started with, and so of course we got here. But if I remember what I started with, and I understand how things work the way they do. So I understand why there is violence in Black communities. When I understand how Black communities got to be the way that they are, when I understand redlining, when I understand the poor education, the poor healthcare, I understand how COVID-19 has had a more adverse effect on communities of color, when I understand where we started from. But if I don't factor in where we started from, then I can say dumb stuff like bringing up Black on Black crime when people bring up violence against Black bodies. Or I can, I'm left to sort of wonder, are Black people more violent? Are they lazier? Are they not as smart? Are they not as educated? When I subtract 400 years of slavery, and when I subtract all of the years following of the dehumanization of Black folks in America. So of course, when I do those things, I'll have a lack of understanding of why things are the way that they are. A couple weeks ago, I was running for Ahmad, walking because I'm out of shape, with my youngest daughter. And we were talking about, she was asking me all these questions about society, asking me these questions about, like, general questions of why are things the way that they are in America? She said, why? She asked me, why is it that some people can't see Black people as equal? And I remembered slavery. I remembered Jim Crow. And I said, it's because of these things. These things shaped the consciousness of white folks in America, whether they are aware of it or not. It helped to shape the way we think about what it means to be Black. And then I explained to her, we were walking past this house, and I said, Gabby, imagine that we have been enslaved in this home for, 40 years. And after 40 years, slavery was outlawed. And we were able then to go free. But we left the home where we had shelter, we had food, we had lights, we had certain amenities that came with us accepting our slavery. And now we're no longer slaves, but we are escorted out of the home because we're free now. But we are escorted out of that home with no education, with no money, with no property, with no resources, with no relationships, with no network. And on top of that, it's then illegal for us to be outside. For any of you who watched the 13th, you know what I'm talking about. It's illegal for us to congregate on corners. We're put in jail for doing that. It's illegal for us to be outside at certain hours of the day, but yet we have no education, we have no money, we have no property. We have not had anything done to allow us to leave this place of slavery and to establish a new way of being. And this is what we find happening in the text that I referenced in Deuteronomy 15, is that they actually, because they were on the sharp end of oppression, we find the Jewish people making more humane laws about how they should live with one another. Because the last effect of remembering what we started with, especially when what we started with was oppression and slavery and darkness and marginalization, remembering those things causes us to live in a more humane way with one another. The rest of Deuteronomy 15 is actually about how you release a slave. because the Jewish people who had been enslaved in Egypt, again, were on the sharp end of that oppression. They're now making laws and they're saying, you know what? When we left from Egypt, we left with Egyptian stuff. But we didn't leave with Egyptian stuff because they gave it to us. We left with Egyptian, or because they volunteered to give it to us. We left with Egyptian stuff because we asked them for it. And we know that if we had gone out into the wilderness without having something, without having some gold, without having some silver, without having some things that we had, and without having something to survive in the wilderness with, we would have never made it. We needed materials to build a new community with. And so because we know we needed that, as we are, again, as I said a few moments ago, when you're dealing with ancient texts like this, to say that it's more humane to treat a slave more humanely, of course, today in our modern society sounds very barbaric. The fact that there is slavery still today in the world, we deem as an evil, as we should. It is an evil. No one should be enslaved to anyone, period. And we know that. As we're talking about ancient literature and we're talking about people whose consciousness is developing, it's unfair of me to expect them to have gotten what we got on their shoulders. So when we're talking about the Jewish people and we're talking about them saying, okay, as we begin to release our slaves, this is a far more humane way of them treating their slaves than they were treated. So they're saying, when we release our slaves after 7 years, here's what we do. We give them property. We give them resources. Like, we send them out ready to go into the world. And only a people group, only a person who has marginalization and as I call it, the blunt end of oppression coursing through their veins, is able to recognize what it looks like to be more humane. If you are not a person who has ever dealt with marginalization or any sort of oppression in your life or in the life of your ancestors, you have no idea what oppression sounds like. So when you are sitting in your boardroom and you're making policies and you're writing procedures for how you hire and how you fire and how you give days off and how you give time off, if the only people making those decisions are people who don't have the blood running through their veins of being oppressed, of being enslaved, if you only have people who didn't start at that place making decisions, of course you wind up with a Betsy Ross flag on your Nikes. Of course, if you're Gucci, you wind up putting out blackface clothing. If the only people in that room have forgotten what they started with. Because remembering that you were slaves in Egypt for the Jewish people wandering the desert, trying to figure out, how do we live in a new world in a better way than the way we used to live? You have this consciousness that says, remember what it felt like when our firstborn children were thrown into that river. Remember what it felt like to have to make bricks without straw. Remember what the whip felt like. Remember what the oppression felt like, because we don't want anyone to feel that. If you are a person who has an awareness of the divine, or the divine is a part of how you think about your life, and you remember slavery, then you as a person moving forward would go, we don't want that in society. We don't want that kind of evil anymore. As we are learning and growing, we want to be more just. We want to have more peace. We want more justice in our community. And one of the ways that shows up is in this really obscure law in Deuteronomy that I won't take a lot of time on, but it's simply this, is that if you happen to come across, this is kind of strange, if you happen to come across a bird's nest on the ground or in a tree. I don't know why you're in a tree, but if you're in a tree, you come across a bird's nest, this is the law. If you come across a bird's nest that has a mother in it with babies or eggs that the mother is sitting on, that you can take the eggs and you can take the chicks, but you cannot take the mother. Again, this is humane for the time that they're living in. Of course, not for us, but the people all around them would have no care, rolling, just stomping on a mother bird and her chicks or taking the entire nest. But this law was designed to say, guys, as we're learning to be just, as we're learning to live with peace in our society, with wholeness in our society, with an awareness of shalom in our society, this is one of the ways that you will restrain your power from oppressing other people. This is one of the ways that you will like keep yourself from being like the oppressors that you came from. And so as I close, I want to give you something to walk away with. Okay, thank you, Alfred, for staying with me. I want to give you something to walk away with. If you are partners with children, if there's a couple, if you're a couple and you're raising children, you have a family who's at home with you, and there are little ones in your home. This week, I'm not asking you to do it every day this week, but this week, can you sit down with them? And I want you to sit with them, and I want you to talk about the fact that America's history is built on 400 years of the dehumanization of people, of Black people. And I want you to have that conversation. Then I want you to ask, how does that affect you and how you think about America? How does that affect the way you think about people at school who are Black or brown? How does that affect how you interact with the friends in our neighborhood? If your kids are smaller, if your kids are older and they're in high school, if they'll allow you to sit down and have this conversation when they're in high school, but to ask them, especially if you're white, to ask them like, hey, like, what do you think about the fact that this history brought us to where we are today? And can I just be honest with you, for Black folks, this is seared in our consciousness. This is not something that we like. This is not something that's hard for us to talk about because of the things that we have to explain to our kids, as I've said before in past broadcasts, things we have to explain to our children about when you're pulled over, about when you apply for a job, about your hair, about all of these things. They're natural things, conversations we're naturally having. But to my white brothers and sisters out there, when you sit down with your kids sometime this week, sit down with them and process the 400 years of slavery and see what it does to their consciousness, see what it does to them to have a slavery mentality be a part of how they process their world. Because I believe that that when we have that filter allow us to process our world, we will wind up with a more just society than the one we have today. If you're watching this and you're a decision maker at your organization, at any level, in your department, maybe you run the entire company, maybe you're in charge of HR, whatever it is. If you are a decision maker and you're responsible for putting together a team of people to help make decisions, this is why it's vitally important that the people making those decisions, that some folks in that room who are making those decisions are people who understand, who have been raised with a mentality that says, I remember the history of America. I have been told what it felt like to be on the pointy end of America's oppression and America's hatred. So I'm in this room with a sensitivity to what it sounds like when we are about to be oppressive in how we create procedures. If this is why it's so disheartening when we wind up with our politicians not being diverse in a community. This is why diversity in politics, diversity in leadership, diversity in every aspect of life, diversity in the school board, diversity in the schools, why it's so important, because if we're constantly getting the same teaching and the same laws and the same understanding given to us by people who don't know what it feels like to be on the sharp, blunt, pointy end of oppression, you don't know how to teach in a way that's not oppressive fully. You don't know how to write a law or write a procedure or write a code of conduct that doesn't have oppressive language and oppressive fundamental ideas behind it. So this week, if you're single, If you're in a partnership with someone else, certainly if you're in a partnership that is raising little ones, or in our case, bigger ones, take a moment this week and think about and talk about America's history and remember what we started with. So thank you guys for watching. Hey, if you're new to watching these broadcasts, I want to just give you an opportunity to be a part of our Patreon community. Thank you to all of you who are now a part of the Patreon community. There's a link in the comments below, or there will be a link in the comments below here on YouTube as well as on Facebook, where you can become a part of the Patreon community. I so appreciate all of you who are doing that. That is where we are contending for a better world together. So thank you guys so much for being a part of this broadcast. Thank you for all of you who shared it. If you have not yet had a chance to share it, please share it. And please, in the comments below on Facebook, if you will, if there's someone who you think should hear this, tag them in the comments. And let's keep commenting and talking to each other throughout the week on this broadcast. All right, folks, thank you so much. God bless you. I'll see you next week.